Corey, we all we hear about robotaxis. We know those deployments are going well. We know consolidation's coming to that market. But outside of the robotaxi market, what is the current state of autonomous vehicles? Because some individuals might not know it's a lot bigger than just robotaxis.
It is way bigger than robotaxis. Screw robotaxis. It's funny as we talk to different clients, around the world, especially in the US, and they ask about what we do as autonomy consultants and strategists. They 9 times out of 10, they'll say, "Oh, you work with autonomy like Teslas," or they'll say something related to robotaxis. So, as you know, I love a campus-based application, and I've been working on these campus-based applications for over 15 years now. But we're talking about from different levels of autonomy and levels of maturity within the different markets. But we look at mines, ports and terminals. I mean, you had our mutual friend Lee White on there talking all about trucking, a master class on autonomous trucking, right? And I think you've had another episode or two related to agriculture. But I love all of those things that are kind of behind the scenes, non-sexy things like that, like trucking and agriculture and what's happening at mines and ports and terminals and airports, industrial campuses like plants and factories. Still focused on the outdoor applications, but it's a pretty wide range of applications beyond robotaxis.
How do you see autonomy being deployed on campus? Is it inside the campus with humanoid robots, autonomous forklifts, or are we talking on the road to the campus, moving individuals, say, from building 1 to building 2 to building 3 to building 4? How do you see that working?
Again, warehouses are pretty mature for autonomy on moving things around, like forklifts and material movement. So really talking about campus-based from building A to building B, or think of an airport, all of the things happening outside with ground support equipment.
Is that on the airport? Is that being driven by the astronomically rising labor costs, individuals calling in sick and not wanting to work? Is that what's driving the adoption of autonomy there in the airport sector?
Yeah, it's actually a combination of things, and those are definitely factors. There's a real challenge with the workforce. They have a tough time finding people, and then when they do find people, are the highest quality people. And so that's one of the challenges, but they're always trying to just improve efficiency and improve safety at the airport. And, small, minor improvements of sustainability or of efficiency at an airport has impacts of hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars, when we talk globally or across the global company.
Are there any FAA restrictions or concerns that overlap this when you're deploying it on the field or on the tarmac?
There are FAA obstacles, but they're working on it. So the FAA is working on figuring out how to change the regulatory environment to enable autonomy. But of course, they're trying to do it in the most responsible way possible to make sure that it's really safe. And we're involved in a couple programs. We worked on that innovation program at Grand Rapids, Michigan with the state of Michigan, Southwest Airlines, and the airport in Grand Rapids to really kind of drive innovation. And we were working on the autonomy applications and piloting, but the FAA was part of that. They were consulting with us and helping us kind of verify safety and start to build some policy and some frameworks around autonomy. But it's a challenge. If I can tell you kind of a quick story of when we were in Grand Rapids, and I met one of the safety officials from the FAA. They provided us permission to run a couple autonomous vehicles on the air side. One was a perimeter security vehicle, and the other was an autonomous grass cutting lawnmower. And so as we were talking to them, they came up with a rule. They provided permission to operate it as long as it was within line of sight of kind of a monitor, a human monitor. And I think in their mind was that they would kind of have a human escort. And as I wasn't trying to cause trouble, but I was just trying to understand and trying for us to get on the same page. But I was asking this safety official from the FAA, I confirmed what he said. I was like, okay, these things have to be within line of sight of a human kind of monitor, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, how far, what's the distance? Do they have to be 20 yards away? Can they be 100 yards away, 200 yards away? And you could see him, they didn't think of that. And he's like, I don't really know. And I said, well, okay, let's look at it another way. Can one human monitor, escort multiple lawnmowers or multiple autonomous vehicles at the same time? And it was the same thing. He was like, I don't know. And I said, or could the human be in the tower as long as they can see the autonomous vehicle? I kept getting the same answer from the poor guy. And then I said, or could we actually have digital supervision and the human have remote supervision? Just maybe they're local, maybe they're far away, but they have eyes on through the sensors. And and I just kind of frustrated him a bit because they didn't think of those things through. So that's what we're also helping with, is we're helping to understand what questions to ask, and then we'll work together to kind of answer those and start to build policy and some terms around those types of safety issues.
What was the end conclusion? To me, it seems very similar to the drone visual line of sight. It's very similar to drone regulations. So were they trying to adapt drone regulations to ground autonomous vehicles there?
I think they're using them as an example of, at least as a precedent and a starting point. But they've got a long way to go. They're just starting their journey. Let me say that. But there's things that are happening. There's a program called the Airfield Autonomy Initiative that is kicking off, I think, next month. And part of that is to work with the FAA and the Department of Defense in collaboration to understand how to start deploying autonomy on airfields. And the FAA is going to be a big part of that. And we're going to be going through, like you mentioned, I'm sure they'll be answering those questions that I just posed.
You look at airfields, you look at corporate campuses, one can't help think of military bases. What are the use cases around how autonomy is being deployed on military bases today?
It's the same as what's in industry. There's a lot of different opportunities. And this is something that I worked on. I know you know this, but for your audience, is I worked as a consultant for the military way back when. I started in 2008. And one of the programs that I worked on was actually a program to look at the use cases for autonomy on military bases. That was purely what it was all about. And what we were finding was a lot like we're seeing in the commercial side, is we identified some of the kind of low-hanging fruit for autonomy to be able to be used. And it was logistics, moving people, moving things around military bases. And it could be, busing, could be all kinds of different logistics elements. There was one called range clearance, which is essentially bulldozers. It's getting like a training range or a targeting range prepped. So it's knocking over bushes and leveling the ground and that kind of thing. So essentially it was autonomous bulldozers. There was campus-based logistics and warehouse logistics. There's sea basing, which I thought was really fascinating. We did a kind of a feasibility and a little bit of an economic study on sea basing. And sea basing is the military's version of ports. It's bringing the ship in and unloading, loading and unloading. And we saw tremendous opportunity for using autonomous technology to load and unload vehicles. The workload is so high and it takes so many people to be able to do that. So that was one. And then, of course, you've got base security. You could use both air-based and ground drones. So it's really similar to the commercial markets as well.
How about from a regulatory standpoint? Obviously, you're operating under a different set of rules. Are there any restrictions in military law that prevent you or the Army or the Navy or any member of the armed forces from any sorts of autonomy on bases? Or is that free and clear if is base chief or whatever that individual oversees the base? Is that who has that final say over that?
Yeah, pretty much. The base commander pretty much decides what happens on the base. That was one of the things that we were able to take advantage of in this program. And we were collaborating with industry as well, is that we could operate level 4 autonomy on a military base if we had permission from the base commander. So I had a lot of meetings with base commanders, talking to them about deploying some kind of an autonomous pilot on their base. It was pretty interesting. The first ones were really fascinating. We didn't know if we were going to get kicked off the base or welcomed. And really, honestly, the very first time I presented the concept that we wanted to run an autonomous vehicle on the base and wanted the base commander's permission, we really didn't know what they were going to say. And he was actually super supportive and excited about it, and really saw it as part of his mission to be able to support the research and development commands and really help us bring this technology forward. Because the intent was for the military, some of it, the intent is to save lives. Those are some of the most important applications for military autonomy.
Where does on base, before we go into theater, where do the MPs come into this? Are they the regulator? Are they the enforcer? Mr. Clothier, sir, you've got to follow the rules that the base commander gives you. Where do the MPs fall into this hierarchy when you deploy autonomy on bases?
The MPs they really don't have that much. I mean, if we're looking at the MPs and the security force or the on-base police, if we were going to deploy an autonomous security system, then they would be our end users. And essentially, they would be our clients and the stakeholders that we would interact with. Or let's say we were going to deploy an autonomous shuttle or a bus that would take somebody from the barracks to the chow hall, or a logistics application that takes something out to the training ranges. And I don't think people can get this in their head. If we're just talking about like US bases, there's US bases that are 30, 40 miles, 50 miles in length. So one of the bases, I think it was Fort Hood, we were going to an event, and in the instructions it said, when you come through the gate, remember it's still another 30 miles to our event. You have to look at these as kind of small cities or even big cities at some level. But to say we're going to deploy an autonomous logistics that's going to carry supplies out to a training range that might be 20 miles away, well, then we would want to interact with the MPs like we would with law enforcement in the civilian side. Is we would be a stakeholder and a partner and a collaborator, and they'd be part of the emergency services if something went wrong. We just want to collaborate and make sure everybody's aware and working together.
What level of collaboration is there between all the branches? You're a Marine. Thank you for your service. Once a Marine, always a Marine. So you have Marines, you have the Navy, the Air Force, and you have the Army. Is there collaboration amongst all branches of the military?
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of collaboration. There's not as much as we want. It's gotten better, a lot better in the last 10 years, especially in the innovation side, is because they're, like starting DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit, and the works, how it has AF works and Special Operation Forces works and Marine Corps works and all of those that are kind of innovation initiatives. So we are seeing more collaboration, but there's always been kind of crossover collaboration, especially, you think about Navy and the Marine Corps. Marine Corps, not a lot of people know, is actually under the Department of the Navy. There's the paychecks come through the Navy and the budgets frequently. So there's definitely collaboration. And then also another example, when I did work as a consultant at TARDAC, they were Department of Army. They're a U.S. Army Research and Development Center, now called the Ground Vehicle Service Center. I think that's what they're called, GVSC. But they had the full Department of Defense mission for ground-based autonomy and ground-based robotics. So they were cross-functional just by design. So they didn't just have an Army mission, they had a Department of Defense mission.
From the Navy Marine segment, is there technology overlap where if the Navy incubates a technology, it goes down to the Marine Corps, or if the Marine Corps, which they do have their own autonomy program, incubates something, it goes over to the Navy and then perhaps to the SEALs? Is there technology sharing in different branches of the Navy?
Yeah, there definitely is. And there's no, it's not that structured. It might be more along the lines of one of the branches through one of their innovation or research and development initiatives gets something to a maturity level, and they can start to define and measure the impact of that technology. And then they do absolutely share it across the other branches. If it has impact here and the Navy can put this same technology to use, they definitely cross collaborate and share that technology. But you can see the different, and that's why I say that sometimes the collaboration is not, it is we're duplicating effort. That's when we don't want to duplicate effort, but at the same time, we don't want to stifle innovation. It's good to have the Marine Corps have their warfighting lab. It's great to have those guys have some autonomy and be able to work on solving problems that they have. But when they solve some of those problems, they definitely, sometimes they will want to do cross collaboration with the Navy SEALs, with Army Special Forces, things like that. That happens all the time. And it's great when you see that happening.
Since Marines are usually the first ones in, are they developing humanoid robots now to go along the brave men and women of the Marine Corps when they go into battle?
Good question. I mean, I've seen the exoskeletons from way back when, from over 10 years ago. The humanoids, I haven't seen anything, but doesn't mean it's not happening. I work on primarily ground-based autonomy, and the exoskeletons are pretty damn cool. To be able to put on a exosuit and become kind of bionic or robotic is a really cool idea. But I don't know where they are related to deploying those commercially or really in the field. I haven't tracked that very closely.
What we do know is that the Department of Defense continues to invest in autonomy. The Navy, for example, is committing $1 billion the next 5 years to do unmanned surface boats. That's pretty impressive. Do you see this level of funding continuing through all branches of the military for autonomy? Obviously, DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, is very vocal on this. The Department of Defense is very vocal on this. Do you see this spending continuing as the military looks to evolve and innovate as we look to the next decade?
Yeah, totally. Part of it is because we haven't been able to deploy, and when you start to see the big numbers hit is when we really look at deployment and where this technology becomes programs of record, where there's actually a line item in the defense budget for these things. So that's when the numbers really start to scale. So, R&D, like a company, they go in it with some level of risk mitigation. They don't want to they don't want to put too much investment in something that may or may not work. That it's a very thoughtful process for R&D. But once things start to get out of R&D and start to be deployed, that's when you really see the high budgets. And you and I both believe that autonomy is our future. It's coming. It's not if, it's when. And so that's, I think, why we're also seeing these budget increases and these investment increases from the Department of Defense, because the technology is getting to a point of maturity where we're going to see real deployments now, and through the next 10 years, we're going to see that pretty steep ramp of new technology being deployed.
We are going to see new technology. You mentioned your consulting days at TARDAC. Autonomous tanks were incubated at TARDAC, and right now DIU is going through an autonomous tank program. How has the autonomous tank technology evolved from when you were consulting at TARDAC to where it is today, to where you see it going over the next 5 years?
It hasn't gone as fast as we would have thought. We thought autonomy was going to be deployed faster. At least I did, and most of the people that I worked with did. When we look at tanks aren't talked about that much for the public, and even in the first years of autonomy research and development spending, a lot of the Department of Defense said that we would not weaponize robots and weaponize autonomy. And you can see that has shifted. I mean, we can see it in the air-based drones and UAVs. Those have been weaponized for quite a while, for over a decade. But we're also now seeing ground-based autonomy be weaponized at some level. So now we're talking tanks on a bit bigger scale. We've seen a nice solid progression in the technology to be able to operate off-road. And then, we also have other technologies like long-distance teleoperation that can operate different types of ground-based military vehicles. So if the autonomy gets stuck, a human can kind of get it unstuck from whatever special case that it found itself in. So that's been progressing. 10 years ago, there was a handful of little minor pilot projects and little R&D projects, where now you're starting to see the pilots are broader, they're more scaled, they're across more wider range of geographies and different platforms, meaning platforms the type of vehicles are on. So I think we're going to keep progressing. And then, as you said, in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, it's just going to keep getting more mature, where these things actually work like we think they should, if that makes sense, meaning they will be pure level 5 operation to be able to at least maneuver wherever we need them to maneuver. And then I still think that the human is going to remain in the loop when it comes to like targeting and actual, weapons firing, is that these things aren't just going to go out and shoot at what they feel like shooting at, is that the human will still maintain that mission. But the autonomy will be to get the vehicle where it needs to go.
If General Patton, George S. Patton, was still alive, what do you think he would think about autonomous tanks?
I'm not that much of a student of General Patton, but the little bit that I have seen watching the movies and the documentaries, especially in wartime, I think he used whatever the hell he needed to win. But, I really don't know what he would think. But I think some of our most successful military leaders, their focus was winning, and so if this was a tool that helped them win, that it would probably be deployed. But again, I'm some of your listeners that are real military historians, they might think I'm an idiot because, they know exactly what he would think and what he would say, but I'm just guessing.
He was a hell of a general, despite his shortcomings. I mean, he helped the Allies win the war. There's no denying that. I think that, this is my humble opinion, I think General Patton would do anything he could to win the war. He would view it as another tool in the arsenal to help the Allies win the war. And I'm sure that he would come up with some really fascinating military tactics and strategies to deploy the autonomous tanks. Now, I'm going to geek out, but if you go to War College, and I'd love to see some of the strategies that are being run at West Point now of how to deploy autonomous tanks in the battlefield. Some of these generals thinking these strategies, it has to be absolutely fascinating. Before they can role play, they can play Risk, they can draw up all sorts of battle plans. But before they get there, the technology has to be built. Are there any hurdles or obstacles that are stopping the Army, in this case particular, from deploying autonomous tanks in the battlefield, or are they currently already out in the battlefield today?
I honestly can't say if they're out in the battlefield, but I can talk generally about just autonomous development and fielding, whether it's for the military or for other commercial sectors. Is the hurdles are the technology. It's that 0.1% of the edge cases, and the reliability. So what we've found, and pretty much across the board for autonomy, is to get that last percent finished takes tremendous amount of time and investment and talent and sweat and tears, because it's those last edge cases. And we use the term a lot of reliably safe and reliable operations, because once we get to that level where it's a durable solution, that's when we can start to deploy it. And so that to me is one of the hurdles, is just making sure that this thing works all the time. I mean, I even look at just as simple at our vehicles that we drive every day, our cars and trucks. When I was young, you could rarely get 100,000 miles on a car. It would start breaking down at about 50. And, everybody was wrenching on their cars back in the 70s and 80s. And nowadays, cars are just so reliable and so much more durable. And, through that evolution, that's where we ultimately have to get with autonomy. And we're at the early days. I mean, we're at the infancy of autonomy still.
I remember years ago, I think this might have been the 90s, I believe it was the 90s, but it could have been late 80s, where there was that Volvo that drove 1,000,000 miles. And the Volvo took the whole press release out with a gentleman and this whole big thing. I think it might have even been a 60-minute special, how proud Volvo was to manufacture vehicles that could last this long. And then you're right, the 100,000 mile vehicle, the 300,000 mile vehicle, and the Japanese entered the market with the Toyotas. They just kept going, and it really forced American innovation, where the cars don't rot. You actually have to keep them going for a long period of time. When you look at reliability from Army perspective, is it sensor reliability? Do you have to have, obviously you're going to have redundancy, but how do you make the sensors that are reliable? And then what issue does the weight? Because obviously the bad guy is going to go bang, bang, bang and shoot at the tank. So it has to have armor. How do you create armor around these sensors for reliability, or you just pull a Bugs Bunny and light the whole thing up with sensors and just hope the bad guys go bang, 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 hit your Disney World and goes down the line and shoots every sensor?
Well, there's a lot of methods. I mean, some of the military vehicles, here's a good example, is that Pratt & Miller created a autonomous targeting vehicle. So they would send it to the training range, and it's called the TMT. It's a mobile target, but it's essentially an autonomous mobile target. That thing is armored like crazy. And essentially, what they do is they'll put the silhouette of a truck on top of this mobile target, and they'll run it around the range, and everybody will shoot at it. The sensors can be armored. I mean, you even think of if it's cameras and it's radar, even LiDAR, could they be put behind bulletproof glass if they need to have some visibility? Probably. There's ways that we can protect these things. But if you look that up, the Pratt & Miller TMT, you're going to see an armored version of a autonomous vehicle that is meant to be shot at, and that thing keeps on going. Run flat tires, hide and protect your sensors, and then also in the programming, once these things are up and running, there's multiple ways. These things can limp home if they know the path they took to get there. They don't need LiDAR probably to find their way back. Some of the vehicles are being designed where you could shoot out 3 of the wheels, or they even get broken off, and they could kind of limp home with one wheel, just kind of really slow and really ugly, but it still keeps moving. So, they're looking at that durability in hostile environments for sure. Some of it, we were talking to NASA way back when, in these early days, and we were collaborating with NASA on all the redundancies they put on the off-road robots. And it was some of the similar ideas because they don't know if they're going to have meteors strike this thing and what's going to happen to these robots, and they don't want them to stop operating. when they're on Mars.
Is that research with the Jet Propulsion Lab, commonly known as JPL, out of Pasadena, since they're the ones that launched the Mars rover? Is that where that NASA collaboration is coming from?
Yeah, JPL, but also they had a autonomy and robotics group in Houston, also at Johnson Space Center.
There's that famous line, Houston, we've got a problem tonight. And then there's all these Houston lines. Iggy Pop has that famous song, Houston, it's hot tonight. There's all these Houston. It's funny, the Iggy Pop song goes, Houston, we have a spaceman on the phone. And it's truly the space city. Obviously, space is a different, hostile environment, but different from being in theater. In theater, we have a lot of enemies that would like nothing more than to steal our technology secrets. Well documented. If you want to use the George W. Bush term, the axis of evil, and autonomy is deployed in these hostile environments. Do we have a self-destruct switch in there so that the technology cannot be stolen? That it goes kablooey instead of going into the enemy's hands?
Good question. Honestly, I don't know. It's honestly a good question. I never talked about that. We were doing a lot of testing. There was kind of a parallel program to my program that was working on heavy truck automation and leader follower and kind of a level 5 automation for logistics trucks, which makes sense. I mean, they wanted to, trucks in truck platoons are such an easy target. They wanted to, try to remove the soldiers and Marines as much as they could out of that environment, or let them focus on the kind of the warfighting aspect if they're in theater, not just driving. Could the computer or the robot drive it? But that's a really interesting question, Grayson. And I've working in that environment for 7 years. I never heard anybody ask that before. I don't know if that was really a major concern of that they could really kind of reverse engineer it if they captured one of these things. But I hadn't heard that question. So again, your creative mind comes up with something new.
Thank you. I'm worried about IP theft. We're seeing it happening in semiconductors today. We've seen it happen in routers. We're seeing it happen in electric vehicles. You're starting to see some espionage in the early days around autonomous ground vehicles. It's going to happen. It's only a matter of time. So we're going to have to figure something out, especially if we put these in hostile war environments, commonly known as theater. The leader follower, was that ever deployed in Iraq, Afghanistan? Was that ever out there in theater?
I think, yeah, it was. I believe it was. And I think it's publicly available. I think they bought like 100 trucks for robotic research, and then they deployed them, I believe, to Afghanistan. And that, I don't know what the volume has increased since then, but I think we heard that, wasn't it about 4 years ago, 5 years ago even, when they kind of made that initial purchase of deployable leader follower. And I know that there's continued work, there's continued R&D to continue to mature the technology, keep making it better, allow it to go more places, be more reliable, operate in more harsh environments, those types of things, go faster. And I think they were operating around that 45 mile per hour range, but I don't know how good the reliability is. It was back then. 5 years later, I'd be interested to see how it's progressed, because I know robotic research is now Forterra, and they're continuing on. They're growing like crazy and getting more military contracts. So I'd be interested to really see what their capabilities are now versus 5 years ago.
What if an IED hit a leader follower? Does the whole system blow up? That's my big concern with platooning and the leader follower, that if one gets hit with an IED or one gets hit with a landmine, what happens? Because if I'm an Army general, I want the ability, this is common military tech, I want the ability to scatter. Because to me, if you have it's for all practical purpose, platoon to train. You're a moving target. You can get hit with an IED, where if I can scatter, I am potentially limiting my casualty risk. Is the military any concerns around that, of just sitting that you're this big, slow-moving target?
Yeah, that was part of the normal testing and operations plan of what happens if any of them get taken out, if the leader gets taken out, if number 2, number 3, number 2 and number 4. So yeah, there was a lot of testing on that. And I think different companies have different solutions. Kodiak's working on a leader follower. I think Stratos has a leader follower that I think they're working with the military. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I know Stratos Defense has some interesting leader follower technology. But, just between you and I, just kind of BSing on a podcast, is that one, I know that they have the ability to reroute. This is now an obstacle in front of me, and I will have to go around it or figure out another route to get around this thing. and then kind of re-team up. Teleoperation could be a solution as well. You put the humans back in the loop, but at a safe distance, and drive them with a remote control to get them back in configuration. But I know that was early consideration, early testing, because that's going to happen, right? I mean, these things are still going to get targeted. That's why we actually want to put autonomy on them. But what happens when, like you said, one gets taken out or destroyed in the platoon? But yes, absolutely, that's been under consideration and part of the work since the beginning.
To clarify on your Kodiak point, Kodiak's actually doing a fully autonomous, not a leader follower. So they're doing what I refer to as the scatter, so fully autonomous. I believe it's a Ford F-150 or Ford Raptor that they're currently deploying with the Army. And I do think that they are going to do a fully autonomous Class 8 with the Army. Can't confirm that. That's the rumblings that they continue to move forward with the Army. Looking at the Army and autonomy, what are the biggest opportunities for ground vehicle deployments, both on base and in theater?
Good question. I think it's the logistics vehicles still are the biggest opportunity. We're still, the only ones that are really talked about are Forterra and Kodiak with the good contracts in the last couple of years. But that's such a, there's so many more opportunities out there. Those are just getting started. So any type of logistics, and we can even look at it from like the commercial side as like long haul logistics, middle mile, and first and last mile. Just put it into military terminology. But like Class 8 trucks, there's massive military fleets and massive opportunities for commercial companies who are working on autonomy. But I think all those things we listed at the very beginning of the conversation all could have really solid large volume of security vehicles, both ground, air, and sea. Any type of perimeter security, surveillance, reconnaissance, all of those are important. Something the military's been working on forever, and I think they're finally getting some solutions that are viable, are squad support. Basically, ground-based support for the troops that are on the ground. Whatever that looks like. It's to carry their gear, to provide extra security, to be able to assist them, for cover and things like that. Those are really interesting. But, from the earlier deployments that are also a lot simpler is just thinking about base operations. I mean, these bases are cities, and they're moving people and they're moving goods, and they have services that are needed that autonomy can handle and manage, like the airfields that we talked about earlier. And, the simple thing of moving the soldiers or the airmen or the Marines around the airbase, around the base, just for regular transportation. There's tons of applications. I love the sea basing too. I think we barely have gotten started on applying autonomy to sea basing, which is essentially like port operations. I wasn't very succinct in that because I just think there's wide opportunities.
When you look at sea basing, do you see autonomous forklifts fitting into that and taking the technology that are being developed and deployed, Gideon, for example, in the warehouse and then porting it over or modifying the stack for inclement weather, for rain, the various different elements, the sea salt, which we all know eats away at things, to modify that. Is that one example that you see there?
Yeah, container movement, vehicle movement, but yeah, definitely like forklifts. But we look at like an automated port currently. There's not that many. It's really wild how there's some ports have very, very little technology, especially autonomous technology, and other ports are completely automated. It's wild, the spectrum, but it's kind of the same thing. Moving containers. One of the things of sea basing that I personally did the feasibility study on, did a little economic feasibility and technology feasibility, was vehicle movement on and off ships. So a ship could have up to 500 small vehicles. And if I remember this right, it was about a 2-week process to unload the vehicles, get them refueled, and get them up armored when they went to theater. And we were looking at how could we do this autonomously? Could it just be almost like a valet park feature where the vehicles could go and just park themselves on the ship and then also unload themselves and park themselves in the staging areas afterwards? I mean, you think about the manpower reduction and the speed that you could do that. It was really interesting to kind of do that study and do the research with both our autonomy groups, but also our sea basing leadership to really understand what the impact could be. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. And I think that's our future. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. There's no doubt about it. At some point, we can have a fully autonomous military base operation at some point, the way the technology is going. Going back to 2004 with the DARPA Grand Challenge, really started to me, ushered in the autonomy era, not just for military use, but also for civilian use. And we saw that what came out of the Google self-driving car project, Waymo, came out of that. Various other leadership positions came out of that. Would we be here today where we are in ground vehicle autonomy without the DARPA Grand Challenges and the DARPA Urban Challenge?
No, I don't think so. Because it's like you said, so much of the leadership came out of that. And it was really the catalyst. I mean, like you said, Waymo, Aurora, May Mobility, Perone, I think Motional, Torque, a lot of our US leaders all participated in that. And then I think the US kind of kicked it off, and China's done an amazing job of catching up. And some people are claiming that maybe they're passing us on their autonomy development. I don't know. The UK has been doing a great job, but I think it started with DARPA. And I don't think we would be as far if DARPA hadn't launched those challenges.
It kickstarted.
Yeah.
It was the government doing great. It kickstarted an entire industry, and you can have the debate around government intervention or not, but the government's incubated the internet. They incubated autonomy. Look where we are with the internet. Autonomy will be there at some point. Right now, the rage on Wall Street is AI. I'll go on the record and I'll put it in this week's newsletter. It's a bubble, and it's going to pop, and it's going to be ugly. But the next big wave is going to be autonomy and automation. Corey, how do you see autonomy evolving over the next decade? It seems that we're having the big GPU breakthroughs. We're having the sensor breakthroughs. Is there going to be some major breakthroughs going to completely accelerate autonomy? We're just going to have a mass adoption over the next decade.
Great question. Over the next decade, I don't think so. I think it's going to be still a pretty steady path of growth and adoption and innovation. I don't see like a major breakthrough that's going to change everything. I think that there's a couple catalysts that aren't technology based that are going to be really interesting. And one I just mentioned, China. I think China's going to put the pressure on the rest of the world to take it more seriously and invest more money into it. And then kind of, I think an interesting one, may or may not be right on this, but I think Tesla is going to kick the robotaxi market in the butt. I don't know what they're going to do. They haven't, those teasers that Elon keeps saying is they're getting into the robotaxi market, and they're going to make an announcement in August. I think that's going to be a catalyst of some sort. And you probably have a much more informed opinion about that than I do. I just think that, so I think there's going to be a little more kind of competitive catalysts than technology breakthroughs.
There is going to be catalysts. At some point, no timeline, Tesla's going to crack full self-driving. They're going to develop a robotaxi. It's going to come, and they're going to turn the market upside down. Like all the conversations that I've been having with investors on the street is we could have a complete change of the autonomous vehicle market for civilian use case. I go on the record and I'll give you a prediction. The Tesla will usher in the personally owned autonomous vehicle revolution. Tesla's going to lead it. GM's going to be there with Cruise. There's something special going on there. You can read the public statements by Miss Mary Barr, Mr. Paul Jacobson around what they're doing. Then the next question comes. Who steps into this next? And I'm going to give a wild card because there has been public statements. Porsche's looking at it with the Macan and the Cayenne. That gets really interesting. They're running on the Mobileye chip sector. I don't believe Mobileye is going to be able to crack full self-drive. But then there's a little company out of San Diego that everybody associates with cell phones, Qualcomm. Their Snapdragon business with a $30 billion backlog, their chip architecture is getting impressive. I don't know if Waymo can succeed in a personally owned autonomous vehicle market. The individuals that I talk to, and these are engineers, say Waymo cannot develop a light version of their stack. Waymo's hand will be forced. More importantly, Ruth Port's hand will be forced at Alphabet. Tesla licenses FSD. GM does a personally owned autonomous vehicle, then GM licenses it to a competitor. Now all suddenly, Waymo's on the back heels because investors say, look at all this revenue that Tesla's generating from licensing. Look at all this revenue that GM's licensing from revenue. Waymo's on their back heels, but you know who gets TKO'd? Ford. Ford's in a very bad place when it comes to autonomy. They shut down the Argo program. Their Latitude program is not working very well. Could be winding down from what I've heard. Where are they going to go? That's going to be the big question. Right now, Ford's being driven by Ford Pro, but that can't continue in an autonomy world. Where are they going to go is going to become a big issue. The whole market's going to change. Outside of what I said, are there any trends that we should be looking for in the market over the next decade, perhaps a change is coming? Is there things that you could see in the market the listeners might say, hey, this is something that we really need to watch for? Because wait a second, Corey said this, and hey, this is going to usher in X, Y, and Z change?
The biggest markets that I think is still logistics. And when I think about logistics, we all know what trucking that is coming, but think of campus-based logistics. So a version of campus-based logistics right now, we know, there's yard trucks at these big distribution centers, big, campus, this big logistics distribution campuses, intermodal logistics hubs, all those things. Right now, everybody owns their own trucks and they're moving around their trailers, on their own site. Eventually, we'll start to morph, and this is happening already because there's about a half a dozen to a dozen companies that are just working on yard trucks, yard dogs, to be fully autonomous. But what about when we have these big logistics centers? Like there's one that we were working on in California, the World Logistics Center. That's, it's 3 miles by 5 miles, and it has, I don't even know how many millions of square feet of warehouse capabilities. What happens when we can actually use less logistics trucks, and we can do a campus-based system, kind of like a port? Look at that as an inland port, and we are just coordinating everything with a single logistics system that's all automated. That's where I think the future is going, and I think that there's major opportunities in there. But at each progression, even just, hey, let's just get the autonomous yard trucks ready and start to get them deployed, start to learn, start to get the algorithms built for proper coordination and processes. Take out the waste and movement, and build the reliability of the autonomy, and then start to scale it. So that's one area that I think is going to be pretty huge, and only a few people are talking about it. Kind of the insiders are the only ones kind of working on it or talking about it. Kind of like agriculture. Agriculture for people like us, it just happened, right? But while we were working on our robotaxis and buses and things like that, agriculture became a powerhouse in autonomy.
It's a huge powerhouse. Agriculture is being led by John Deere. John Deere made two of the you could say the greatest acquisitions that will go down in history when they bought Bear Flag Robotics and they bought Blue River Technology. Bear Flag got them automation. Blue River got them See and Spray. You can't open a John Deere catalog or go anywhere without seeing John Deere See and Spray, the 8R tractor integrating the Bear Flag. Deere's firing on all cylinders, but when it relates to deploying ground vehicles, my advice to the listeners and viewers is call ARIBO. That's your business. That's what you do. You help plan to avoid mistakes. If you looked at the World Logistics Center, 3 miles by 5 miles, there's something going on. It's in California. You can't deploy anything autonomy there. So boy, oh boy, was that a mistake. They could have called ARIBO up and said, wait a second, you might want to put that on the other side of the Arizona-California border because, oh, by the way, you can fully automate there. That's where planning comes in. Corey, this has been a fun, insightful conversation from civilian autonomy applications to defense autonomy applications. We're going to have you back because this is going to evolve, and some of these trends that we spotted are going to come true, and we're going to deep dive into them next time. But for today, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them?
Yeah, probably what we've already said. Nothing wrong with being repetitive. The AVs are coming, and really they're coming for overall good purposes. I mean, it's the greater good is going to really see the benefit of autonomy. I think we need to collaborate more and even allow competition. Don't be so, worried about competition. The more competition, the more clients, the more deployments we can have. And then I think the last thing is what I kind of get on my soapbox about is really innovation needs leadership. It needs people, and people like you who are out there promoting and guiding and bringing people together. But, I'm a big believer in leadership innovation and leadership applied to innovation. There's my little soapbox of basically, let's work together, work hard, make it happen.
I like that. Competing is good. That's why we have capital markets. Innovation does need leadership. Innovation needs a backbone. It takes a leader to see the program through and to not crumble like a cheap suit under pressure. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling autonomy. Corey, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thank you. Super fun.
It was awesome.